Afternoon, Jake. How are you doing?
Hello and welcome.
I think Jake's got the best profile pic there. I mean, my normal one, I don't look nearly as engaged. And apparently, I scared him away.
Did you, Joe?
I mean,
Don't talk about people. All right, so this we're just going to open up for questions about collaborations for helping them.
okay. I'm betting that's not what Metten's here for, but it's good to actually meet you in person because we've seen your images coming through for years.
Oh, that's fun.
There's everybody coming on. Um, we will have a slight issue that my Turkish is, I was going to say rusty. I'm going to go with non-existent. Um, I rely heavily on uh, Google Translate, which is not the best way to have a conversation. Um, Actually pulling it up now to go from. Yep. So we got a handful of folks. Most of the folks on here actually work at Bugwood. The rest, Jake, Deb, Metten, you're the people that don't work here. And you're the reason why this exists to catch up on what you want. We did have a schedule today talking about collaborations and how we take working groups and highlight what they do. But if that's not anything that any of you are like, yes, I've always wanted to know how I get a working groups to have like pretty pictures, then we can just go to your questions. Jake, we've seen you before. I believe you're out in Utah. Your Zoom's not muted, but we can't hear you. And Deb, we recently had the pleasure of working with to get a new contest set up for her for people reporting coral ardisia, your ardisia agents.
Testing.
There we go. There's Jake.
Great. It's this headset. Every time, when I switch to Zoom, I don't know what happens, but the headset just doesn't want to work.
I've heard of other folks with similar issues. So depending what folks are looking for, I think Hallie is actually here to talk a little bit about collaborations, but she more wants the stats out of collaborations to work for her. So I know where she or her questions are. What brings you to us today, Jake?
I'm just having on, I believe it was the iBiocontrol app. I think it's just Biocontrol now. We are entering observations of biocontrol agents, and they're popping up as collections. And I just want to see what we can do to address it so it doesn't create confusion in the future. And I think there's a few different ways we can do it because we don't have a lot of collections in Nevada, pretty sparse in that sense. So I just wanted to see what was going on, if it was a common issue, and just see what we could probably do on our end to address it.
Okay. And if we're talking app, that's probably Jordan. And Rebecca, have you dealt with iBiocontrol?
Just a little bit, yeah.
Okay.
So, Jake, did you say that you were when I'm looking at the EdMaps biocontrol app and I just open it, there's release, collection, observation, and negative. And what did you say was the issue?
I think they're trying to record it as an observation, but it's getting reported as a collection. So I mean, if there's only a release and a collection and a negative, maybe there's just some misunderstanding on
no.
our end.
There's observations, it's the
Okay.
one above negative.
I
But
think that's
if there's something getting, if a setting is a problem within the app, I can look. Do you have a name of someone I could look up that has mentioned this, so I can see their records?
yeah, it'd probably be Andrea Moe or Ryan Magera for Nevada. There's a few other ones that are submitting collections, but and if it helped Rebecca, we only have one collection site in Nevada, as far as I'm aware of, out in Lovelock. So I mean, if it's outside of that, we can probably just switch them to observations. But it's kind of a small issue. We just wanted to address it, but so we didn't create any confusion in the future.
Yeah, 1 second. Okay, you said Andrea Moe is one of them.
Yeah, and I could probably even give you a specific report if that would help.
Yeah, let me.
Checking the server is going to its own endpoint. It could be
That's
something
not
on
surprising.
there.
For those that haven't been on office hours before, this is what happens. We actually will debug someone's issue live.
Yeah, no, we appreciate the help.
Okay, so. Okay, so. So I need a visit type. Interesting. Okay. .
Try and find you a specific example if it's not a release, Rebecca.
Yeah, so see, I see she's got release and collection, and those are the main.
Yeah, I think the collections, the recent collections, are truly all observations. So I have this one report. You can put it in the chat. If I can do the chat, I'm not good at this.
Four. Project 31, okay.
And it's possible we could be doing something wrong on our end too.
Well, so okay. So the releases are correct. It's the collections that potentially should be observations.
Yeah, observations. Yeah, the collection should be swapped with observations. And if it would help, Becca, I can kind of give you like where we've been doing collections. Sorry, Rebecca, I could just send like, hey, this is the one collection area we have in Nevada, and we can I don't know what the easiest way to do that is.
Well, I'm right now I'm looking at her reports from that app, and so Jordan, you said do we have a raw, Jordan, for the data coming from this app?
That's what let's see. I was looking for the endpoint at the moment. There should be a dump
Okay.
on that directory. And let me double check.
Okay.
Yeah, we have done.
So it's iBiocontrol upload,
Hmm.
new upload.
Okay.
Upload.cfm.
Okay.
Biocontrol. New upload.
So, when you guys find it, do you want me to, what information can I give you so that you can look to see what it was submitted as? I can give you object IDs or something else, if that would be helpful. User ID, date, stuff like that.
Date. Well, I'm not looking at production. Whenever
Oh.
I am looking at Kernal, are you?
Nope.
Good. I would have to see the production text dump to be able to do
Is that
that.
something I can access?
Are they using
Bam,
Android
yeah.
or iOS? Because those two are submitting at different locations, so we will have dump on different locations.
So, it's iOS.
Okay.
Well, and Hallie's actually here for the tutorial that we advertised, which
If you're not doing it, that's okay.
Yeah, sorry for sidetracking you guys.
we were weighing to see if anyone actually had interest in it. So knowing that you actually wanted to hear it and we advertised it,
Yeah, do
I
we need
can-
to go in a breakout room or how do you
I can
want-
shift them to a breakout room
Yeah, do that.
because, well, we were here first.
That's fine.
So let me shift. Just take room 1.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Yep. I'll go ahead and shake you over to it. We're gonna stay here for the Connect stuff because, loop. I clicked the wrong person for a second. Yeah, we'll do the connect stuff here. Jake, if you want to send yourself over to room 1.
Yeah, let me
Actually, I found it. I can do it.
breakout. I can see that. Breakout rooms. Room 1. I got it. Thank you.
Yep. All right. So take it away, Debbie.
Oh gosh, okay. Uh, so this may be a little bit more you know, identify some areas of help if you have them as I move along. I believe that most of you on here, Haley and Deb, I know that you, Haley, I know you have a collaboration. Deb, maybe not so much officially, but you work with some projects. With EdMaps and Metin. Joe, do you know if there's any?
Metin doesn't have any collaborations, but he has been an avid contributor to
For
the image
images?
systems. He uploaded some video a while back, so I think he's here just to see what's going on with Connect more so than anything in particular to him.
Very cool, very cool. So I just kind of wanted to do today fairly informal, and we can follow up with some documentation. Gotta love some directions. And so what we have been providing to groups who are just now coming in, and let's rewind just a bit. So collaboration is an amazing word encompassing some different things, but think, if you will, you've got a project, maybe it's grant-based. You've got a couple of people in this office at that university. You've got some people over here at this organization, and you're all in different places, and you're emailing back and forth, and hey, it'd be really great if we could have a website. Oh yeah, we need a team directory. Oh, wouldn't it be really cool if we could put all of the product resources, images that we develop out of this project? What if we could all put that together? Oh, okay, well, yeah, I think we can build this. I think we can build that. That's where Connect falls in. It is an amazing tool that not only connects our individual Bugwood tools, and brings them in for you to use, but it connects you to your people, allows you to communicate out with that group, not like a chatting kind of thing, but more of a, hey, we've got some really cool information, and we've got some people that are on board with this project, and so I'm going to send them a newsletter or an internal uh, message communication kind of thing. And it allows you to collect your resources, whatever format type they may be in, together. Combine all of that great information with the technology ability here with Bugwood, and it allows Connect to, oh my gosh, output all of those collections, whether it's a collection of team members, a collection of resources, a collection of images, onto a website, which is a fairly large part of a project generally, at least these days. And so getting all that set up when you have all the bits and pieces here and there, that's where the collaboration comes into play. It's a free tool available for use. You register for a free Bugwood account, and that opens the door for possibilities. So what this is it's that creation and onboarding guide to get started. So for several of you, you may come in where we've gotten you started, but, and I think several of you have heard us say before that Connect is a self-service platform. So you don't always need us. But it will start with a Bugwood account. If you had an EdMaps account, that's your Bugwood account. And when you log in, you're going to come to a dashboard like this, and you're going to come over here to our favorite section called collaborations. If you are just, and Joe, so if someone, say, does not have anything in their My Collaborations list, the add button is there no matter what?
The add button is there no matter what. If you don't have any collaborations, don't feel bad.
Yeah. And yeah, so I mean, these are groups that I have been associated with or connected to, whether it was a manager standpoint, because every group needs at least one leader. Sometimes we all like to lead, but we do have a role hierarchy. But you come into My Collaborations and you can think, okay, well, I want my own collaboration. So you can simply add one. And what happens here is you're going to add something in my really cool group, and you are going to add a little paragraph, almost like a justification, like, I've got this really cool group, and we have whatever. You're going to hit the add button, and then we are going to get an alert that says, hey, someone out there has got a really cool group and a really cool project. Are they in or are they out? Once we say, yeah, you're cool, we want you in the club, you're going to get a notification that your collaboration has been created, and then off you go and get started. Uh, then at that point, and Joe, step in here as needed. We're going to let them know that their collaboration has been created, and then does the person who creates the collaboration, are we assuming that they're the chief of the group?
So yes, they get added in as at least a manager of the group.
Okay.
We did have this wide open that anybody could say, I want to start a collaboration. Rules get made when people do things that you go, oh,
Then someone did.
and someone did. So now there's an approval process. It's not a high bar. It's that we go, you're a real person. This isn't spam. This is actually something we should add. So yes, it's this description gets used then when we're displaying this group, and later we talk about your group and we show the group to others. It's letting you know, hey, this is all about this group and what they do. One of the features that, knowing where things are going to go usually helps me out for why I would do anything. There's that collaboration builder feature. And when you're on that, it's saying, and if type in for your interests, integrated pest management. Interests. That might pick it up as well, but so here's what these different groups work on. This is a way to help find stuff. And we start going, well, how do I get my collaboration higher up? How do I get my stuff to show up here? So that's kind of where Debbie's going through, is that after you have your collaboration, your next step is to go in and edit that information and show and start populating some of this. I'll let Debbie
Yeah.
take it from there.
Yeah, yeah. And I just I have to defer to the expert just to be sure that I am sharing the correct information. Um, but so once you get the check mark and you're in, you'll see those very simple fields that you filled in when you asked for a collaboration to be added. You're going to have a name and you're going to have a description. And so don't think like, oh gosh, we changed our name. I need to do something different. That's not quite right. Um, that's okay. We got a button for that. So on your collaboration dashboard, you can come in and edit. I just like to go to all options right off the bat. It's in this environment where you are making the impression, creating the resume, if you will, for your collaboration. And where Joe mentioned, how do I get my name on that collaboration builder? This is how. Think about the collaboration builder as a directory of people who are experts in specific areas, in specific regions. And because they chose to be a part of Connect, this is a benefit that we can extend to them. You do have the ability, whether you want to be a part of that collaboration builder or not. You do have options on whether you are going to allow people to join, send an email, whatever. So I'm going to kick out of here and we're just going to, I'm going to come back here and let's just follow up with that to finish that conversation out so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so we're in integrated pest management and we want to get involved. I want to know who else works in my area. Right now, you see these join and contact buttons, and then these have not, but there's oh, is there a third button or am I remembering something else? Oh, he's gone. So right here, this is an immediate open join. This is a cue from the collaboration that says, hey, yes, we want you to join. That again is going to push a notification to a manager that says yes or no. Or if you've just allowed it, hey, anyone can join. I'm not that picky. Or, hey, I've got some questions about this. I've got this research project coming up. So it's another way to connect with people who are in the same wave of research. Yeah. So third button, yes or no?
Yes.
I
Subscribe.
believe
Subscribe. Way to go. So remember that part when I said that we had some really awesome technical developer people? That was one of them. Subscribe. So think about, hey, I'm an early career scientist. I'm in integrated pest management. This looks like a really cool group. I'm not ready to join them, but I want to follow them. I want to see what's going on. So you could liken the subscribe button to maybe like a follow on a social media platform if we were really stretching it. But the subscribe feature has other uses when you expand the scope and what you need to accomplish for your working group. The subscribe button is helpful there. But to go back, so this is we were talking about, we want to edit, we want to be higher up. it's fields. The more information you can provide. We talked last week about why complete your Connect profile. It's so you can connect. You know, who's going to say I want to go to that group if they don't know anything about them? So it's all that kind of a little bit of advertising and promotion. Um, A good rule of thumb here, when you see this green bar across the top, that means you are not acting in Connect as yourself. You're not editing your own profile, but you are editing something that you belong to or something that you have a permission for. So these little things are really important to pay attention to. They help keep me out of trouble and know where you are in this. Collaboration profile is very similar to your personal profile. So same kinds of things. You'll have a profile. You can put settings, fill in your expertise. But the difference is this isn't about you. This is about your group. That's where you're going to hit higher. If you fill out interests, that look familiar? Subjects, do you remember seeing that on the collaboration builder? Any of this information, just remember, it just makes your really cool group look really cool. Important at the bottom, there's always going to be a save button. Oh, it's demographics. Okay. Collaboration type. Did you come from a grant? Is it a multi-state? And you think, well, golly, I mean, you're being nosy. I mean, why do you want to know all that? Well, the more we find out about this, that just deepens, what do you want to call it? The user base of Connect and shows the relationships with the organizations that they belong to, how the collaboration grows. If it's a grant, you're going to need some statistics at some point in time. So all of that. Now, we talked a lot about approvals. It all comes into play. Join. Do I want automatic joiners? Do I want them to need approval or do I want them not allowed? Here's a join link. Okay. You are setting up your collaboration because you got voluntold that you're going to do this. And you want, because you know you were able to fill out your Connect profile on your own, and you're working with other professionals and they can do this themselves, you're going to send them an email and say, I need you to join this collaboration so that we can go forth and be awesome together. Search. Remember, we had to hit the search button to see what collaborations were together. Yes or no? Do you want to be on that collaboration builder page or not? And then this one, really cool. We like it. Do you want to collect names of subscribers? If you hit yes there, you're going to get that magic little third button. If you hit yes here, that's going to open the possibility to use that subscriber list in other places. Again, save is important, and you're going to pay attention to the same menu items that we ask you to complete when you talk about your profile. So the profile page, your expertise, your demographics, your connections. The deeper you go, the more you get. Okay. So let's see. Trying to think where I want to. Just at this point, anybody got any questions? Or just this is good information?
Good info, thank you.
Okay. All right. hit back and see where I want to take you next. Okay, so we talked about whether it was us that set up a collaboration or you set it up. We talked about how you can set, where you can change settings to make your collaboration visible within the Connect system. And so now really the next step becomes getting your people on board because sometimes they do not like to use the link to onboard themselves. Like I said, we do have some guidelines that are pretty simplified. This is a guide geared more towards a collaboration manager, so that leader of the pact, the one, I don't want to say doing all the paperwork, but is slightly uh, that way. If you are that manager person, chances are most of your work is going to start with the My Collaborations tab so that you can get into your collaboration. And again, if you know exactly where you need to go and change, this is just a little quick link. I just go to all options. As that manager, you're going to spend a lot of time under this green bar. Once you're under this green bar and you're in your collaboration, these are all menu options that are available to change, update, work with that in particular. For adding people in or getting people on board, that's your manage users selection. You're going to see a little bit more on my screen because someone decided that I was capable enough to have a little bit more of admin power. Not always a good thing sometimes. You can add members either using an Excel upload. You just need a first name, a last name, an email, and then what role are they playing? Are they a member? Are they a chairperson? The role can be whatever you determine it to be. So as you look over here on, I don't know if I should be showing you all this. Uh, the role describes what role that person plays. You can come here and add them individually, just a first name, a last name, an email. If they are new to Bugwood, you can use this button here. It says send email on account creation. That is, hey, I created an account for them, and so I'm going to let them know to follow up. That is a toggle on off button, and you can choose either way. If you need to check and see if a member is on the list, we've got a cool little search bar there. All right, and moving on along. Requests. We talked about whether people can come into a collaboration or not. This is the screen where you're going to manage those requests. These is primarily for subscribers right now. So we have the option to deny. You can see we've got rejected or approved. It will come in as pending if you need to make any action with it. Now, let's look at our message center. So we talked about the connecting part of the collaboration that's bringing all your members together. And it is sometimes it's a tedious process for those managers. This is the communication part of it. Think MailChimp type interface where you can do a block type build HTML newsletter. that is going to go to people in my collaboration based on their role. Recall the subscriber role. I can send a message to my subscribers only. I can send a message to my entire list of members. I can choose, I only want to send something to your executive type staff or board or whatever. Here is your block newsletter builder, and it's all within the Connect system. I know we were showing this, and someone was like, what's this cost? It's a tool. It's free. It's to help us support you do better and continue to be really cool. Oh gosh, I thought I sent that email for a little bit. It's going to store your previously sent emails. Your dashboard is where you can see, oh, hey, I'm doing pretty good. I sent this email here. It went to 1,228 people and 423 got read. So, okay, that's a 30% read rate. I will take that. Only one failed because we have been able to build in a bad email checker to handle that portion of when you do mass email distribution, which helps support cleaner statistics. Another part of collaborations is integrating it with, we use WordPress. So some of the features that we have developed for our other clients or groups are good for everyone else. So we want to share that great information. If you want to add subscribers to your list, this is the code to put on your WordPress website that allows someone to enter a first name, a last name, and an email address and hit submit. That triggers a request for a response to your email address. So no one had to email you and say, would you please add me to the list? All you have to do is that oversee that administrative role. Yeah, I would like to. Archive newsletters. How do you see the mailings or the newsletters that I've sent previously? That's the link that you're going to put with the button. And our favorite, the collaboration member directory. Remember that team page that we talked about? Yep, there it is. So this is using Connect, putting it in there, and then taking it out into a real type application. User permissions is where you are going to designate who has the ability to make changes within your collaboration. So who do you trust to do important things in your collaboration? And that can be leveled however it needs to be. So that is a little bit of the walkthrough. I mean, we can continue to go on and on and on, but I don't want to take up anybody's time if they want to ask some questions that we didn't cover. I know statistics is one item that everybody is very interested in learning and knowing about. I know when it comes time to do Gulf South Vector's quarterly reports, this, as it has developed over time, it has become a lifesaver. It's also helps us know future developments. I'm still having to count these. It would be really cool. So we love to hear how you're using our tools so that, maybe a need that you have would work not only for you, for us, but for someone else. So with that, I'm going to hush up and open the door to Joe if you want to talk about statistics, or Haley and Deb if you had particular questions so that we can look at what you've got.
So I will share.
Oh, yeah. Stop.
Nope, wrong screen. Just because one thing you pass a little bit by. So one thing with the collaboration is, where are the people?
Mm.
This is where we do have maps to show. For Gulf South Vector is a good example. I've got this cluster of people down here. That's because that's the New Orleans office where a lot of people are. But it gives a better idea of where members of your collaboration are. It's why we were pushing for bios and things to be filled out. And then at the bottom, this is actually the breakout for these different groups. They have a newsletter, so they have subscribers. What I think they like the most is I can say, for my subscribers that are getting that newsletter, okay, what languages do they know? Where do they work? This is providing just some additional information so that when they write their next grant and they say, well, we have a newsletter with 1,100 subscribers, it is broken out amongst these groups. The only way they get this data is by getting people to buy into reporting and telling us about them. So it's why not only do these groups have, the individuals have demographics, but the groups themselves have them as well. We are doing a little more with that data occasionally. This is where I've been having just way too much fun. Highlighting, well, this big blob up here is Gulf South Vector and the people in it. And apparently, Derek Lassimier is part of this group. He's also part of GDA, and he's also part of other working groups. So how do I see where different people are part of multiple different groups? What's this community? It's where Hallie, I would love to do this with the Soybean Science for Success folks. Just leave in Soybean Science for Success, Crop Protection Network, SRIN, and say, all right, what is the overlap? Not only in terms of the people involved in it, but if I take that a step further, in the resources we're publishing. What is USB's, United Soybean Board's entire portfolio, and how is it spread among all these groups? It's where I get excited about this kind of stuff. And where I think you've touched, because I know I have an outstanding email with you on statistics. And this was looking at Soybean Science for Success, where the resources you guys have made available. You've got 110 that you guys have entered in, and they've been viewed 2,200 times in that month. Being able to get some of these stats back, the direct ones you have, those numbers are lower because you're not the publisher for every single resource. But darn it, you went in and added a whole bunch of resources, some of which you weren't the publisher for, but we still want to have that recognized for how much what you're putting out there is being used.
Sometimes it's the simplest things because I have been so frustrated not being able to find all of our resources on here, completely ignoring the drop down box at the top that's direct versus administrative. So,
Yep.
Solves a lot of problems for me.
Yeah. The direct is we were the publisher or the author of it. The administrative, because you're doing all the data entry, anything that you've entered in and it's part of the node, which is what's showing up here on your resource database. So all of this stuff, that administrative button matters a lot for you.
Yes.
Maybe we need to make that not white. Maybe we need to go to a different color so people see that a little more. It's where your Science for Success page, I don't know that you're going to list all the members. You might, and that would be fine. Right now it's you, and that's great. But
So
yeah,
I do plan on adding all of our people, or I mean, some of them probably do already have an account, but getting them added is one of my goals because they often ask me about like their material statistics. And if I were to add them as an author, they should theoretically be able to see this for themselves in their own, like not as the collaboration necessarily, but um,
so who's one person that you know has a resource?
um, you could do Rachel Ban. I think she also has a, well, no, see, that's the deal. None of them are added as authors right now in the database. We just have the author listed as Science for Success.
Okay.
So I will have to go in and update all of our stuff once I have everybody in there. But we didn't do that because we knew that we didn't have everybody in the
The
system.
the good news will be that the statistics, when you add them, will be retroactive.
Okay.
It
That's
just
good to know.
cares that someone is assigned to that resource. It doesn't care when it was accessed and when they were added. That's a complication too far. It does end up showing then on, and this is what they get to see, that statistics link is in the same place for every person. This is my stats. If I go to a collaboration, you've seen the stats there on their own profile. So this is Christian Wanamaker. The reason I pulled this up was actually for Deb, because our DJ agent Gold, he's currently the front runner. Here's his stats overall. I mean, the amount of data he currently has, he doesn't have a ton of data, but you can see how much even the data he's reviewed 324 records in last month, those were downloaded 1,300 times. Access of any of this digital information is still good stuff. And this is just one little piece of us saying how awesome he is. So yeah, every single person, the only time this doesn't show for somebody is if I go into my profile and I come down and say, I would like my profile to be private. People don't need to know I exist. I'm not a public figure. That would stop us from showing a profile for them. It even stops it when I'm looking at things up here and there was somebody in one of these groups that I moused over. The only reason I'm able to show their name is because they have said, yeah, you can go ahead and show my profile. Right there's a private profile. I can't tell you who that is. I might be able to tell you what organization they're a part of, but some person who wishes to remain anonymous is a part of that particular group. Well, actually, in this case, this group has chosen not to make we don't know what the working group is. They said they didn't want to be listed publicly for that collaboration. It goes at multiple levels of people who want to hide themselves from the general public for whatever reason.
And so when you are looking at stats, then, and you scroll all the way to the bottom, you can do the generate usage report. That only shows direct.
I believe you are correct that this is direct.
Is
This is
there a way to pull, like if once a year we wanted to pull the actual, report for all of what we've added?
I just need to make an administrative report.
Okay.
And that it needs to be just available. It's just to show how fun and exciting this can be. This is where we originally did this for images. This is for me personally. This is for the administrative report. This is for my organization because I want to compare myself to my peers because I'm better than them and I want to show that to everyone. And then this was for different collaborations that were out there. Every single one, we had this giant page of reports. It just got to be a bit much. I think going to this report and putting an option at the top for administrative versus direct, it's easy enough to do. Because we're only doing it for a certain time period you picked, and I'm not doing monthly interval counts, we can run that live. The current stats page, this compiles once a month at the start of the month. That other report, this one, every time you run it, you can set the dates to whatever granularity you want. You get back a result. So if I want to say only for, it's telling you what the earliest date was. If I switch this just to January, to there. For you, the data doesn't change that much.
Yeah, because we've only also been on here since
Right.
last year.
And the next level of report down, yes, this did not return, this will not sum the 228. Because in some cases we weren't told, there was no referrer provided.
Yep, and we've talked about that before, that some sites also have weird integrations and things.
Yeah.
I have to jump to another call, but my last question on this is, would there be a way to export this to Excel?
It is possible. We need to add the function.
Um, Not the end of the world, just I would much rather export it and be able to copy and paste into like our metrics to add up for people than um, do it individually. But even just getting the administrative report option to kind of see what is doing well and maybe what we should continue doing or what's not being accessed, sort of thing, would be really helpful. But
The first use case I would skip. I would tell them, if you want your own copy of that report, by all means, go to your own stats page, go to the bottom and click the link. Because you trying to break up that list by author,
no, this would just be like, so I have all 110 of our things versus
yeah,
it's like we have our CV that tracks, all of our other things for our resources.
yeah. And for the export, we could probably also add in here a link to that resource. What is not returned in here right now that we're still playing around with, we actually know what version of that resource was clicked on. This is just showing the resource name. So if you wanted to know, well, how often are the Spanish resources looked at versus the English resources, this currently is not giving you that back. We do have that data. We just need to return it. Yeah. This definitely, our reporting, there's always more reporting we can do.
Yeah. Even just
It-
finding the, administrative versus direct today was very helpful. So thank you.
Yeah. And there are plans for additional, like, I have access to your Google Analytics. There is the plan to pull the Google Analytics data into this because that is your website. We are running it. I can pull all that together and give a report out. So if there's other stuff like that, that if we were to doing it, eventually we've handled your reporting, let me know. We're trying to build it for all the other groups. Might as well make sure it fits what you want too.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah. you can see the years of me having to write reports and going, I'm tired of flipping through all these systems to get back just a handful of numbers that, can it really be this hard?
I find myself wondering that a lot.
Deb, did you have any questions?
Just about the potential for a message board function.
So right now, through the message center, if I'm sending an email, it's going one way out. That message could be as extensive as an entire alert about something, or it can be a short and sweet, hey, here's what we're looking at. Let me clarify something. When you say message board, are you talking about trying to reach out to other people with similar interests, or are you talking about, I have a group, I wish to notify them of something?
A place where people can come and ask questions and get feedback from other users. So this is like for the Florida invasive plant and invasive animal and plant management. People can come and ask treatment questions, ID questions, and get feedback from others.
Okay. We have not built out a full forum. It's been considered. I was stopping short of building LinkedIn. Because, wow. You've got the newsletter out. You do have the ability through squirrel has to get going in the wheel sometimes. If there is a group, I could contact them. That is from a person back in, and then they would hold their conversation through email. That contact is only going to the administrators, the managers of the group, not to the entire group. And there is also this, so many users around have said, I am interested in this. I want to send an email to whoever the heck those 20 people are. It is a blind email from you to you don't know who. It goes through us to judge it, to make sure that, yes, we're going to let this go out, because people, we're always concerned about something being abused and then people being harassed by random stuff. Yeah, we've stopped short of doing a full social media forum platform. We keep debating if we have to go there. The other big one people keep asking for is, I want a place just to put working documents for my group. When we've had folks get that far, we have a Basecamp account that we let anybody have a project in. This is where different folks, like here is, yeah, they won't mind. Corn pathology working group. This is where they're having discussions about the draft fungicide stuff going on. Here's where she's put that out. Here's who it went to. And if the group chose to respond back, they could all come back and have an entire conversation. Like here, they were discussing a little bit about the abstract being put in for the poster. This is closer to a forum. I don't have to build this. It's a place where the group can come in, work, and do their stuff. They can control access. IPM Center's picking up the bill, which it's one flat price for everything we want to do.
That would probably work for what we need.
Okay. So I am more than happy to set you up in here, let you go and start assembling the group. It has a lot of pieces and parts to it, depending on what you want to use it for. Some people, and this is where, do I need a message board? Do I need a calendar? Do I need docs and files? Do I need chat within the group for instant messaging? Do I want to send periodic messages asking people, so how's it going? For different things in project management, these tools make a lot of sense. For a lot of groups, they turn off to-dos, they turn off the schedule, they turn off docs and files, and they're only really concerned about that message board.
Yeah. I think
Um,
that would be all we would need for what we're trying to do at the moment.
so let me go ahead and make a new project. What do you want to call it?
Well, I'd have to, it's a big collaboration with several other people. So, for the short-term Florida Invasive Species Council.
Create the project, and then, yeah, they recently changed things. You want a message board, and you pretty much just want the message board at this point. And we're going to, you currently are not in here. So we're going to go to, we are working at getting an integration that adds people from Connect to here. We're not there yet. And you are at University of Florida. All right, so you should be getting an email on that, and you can see the Florida Invasive Species Council. Okay. So you should have access to that project. I'm currently in it. Eventually I'll leave it, kick the tires, poke it, prod it, see if it does what you want to do. If you try it out and you eventually are like, no, you're not going to hurt my feelings. Tell me no, I'll delete the project. It's fine, really.
I got kicked out for a few minutes, had some internet issues.
Oh, I hadn't noticed. Sorry about that. So I sent you the invite. You should be invited into this. You can go in and try it out. If you turns out that after trying it out and poking and prodding it, you don't like it, just let me know. I'll drop the project. It doesn't matter to me. I'm here to help you. I'm not here to sell product.
Yeah, could you also add Antonio Rodriguez? I think the three of us had talked a little bit about Connect before.
Okay. And he also got the manual on using Connect. And he and I had a very long conversation on Anthony. Notice I don't talk and type at the same time. pbc.gov. What is PBC?
Palm Beach County.
Okay. So here, invite people. He may wonder, but he'll figure it out.
Yeah, I think I'll send him an email so he's got a heads up.
Yeah, when he and I talked, there was a lot of discussion about what direction do you expect the communication to go?
Mm-hmm.
And every single group has the same issue. How do we want to interact with each other to get something done? I'm amazed at the number of different answers.
At least 3 more than the number of people involved.
Or if you get PhDs involved, 3 people were in the meeting, there were 5 solutions determined.
Exactly.
Like, come on now, you're killing me. So yeah, try it out. If it works, great. I think I also offered him Slack. Slack, the main reason we end up using it is because it does far more for instant messaging. I will copy this link and I will drop this into the chat. I'll briefly show you how we're using it. So we use it for just intergroup communications for different parts of our team. I mean, looking at what's been going on with Screwworm, there's been some fun discussions recently. But we also do things like I pipe all the Google alerts into a channel for online presence. So we all get this notification and I can see the people who are in this channel to know, oh, that's where we're popping up in the news. I've got system updates that these are from our systems telling us what's been going on. So if anyone had any questions, here's this additional information. On the IPM one, which is the one I shared the link for, channels. That's vector outreach. Takes me a second to find some things sometimes.
Yeah, there's a vector one in there, but it's not active. We didn't get a lot of, there it is, hashtag vector/outreach, third from the bottom.
Right. The one I was looking for was I had one that was getting a feed of new invasive species reports. Because I just fed I fed the data from EdMap straight into it for a given area. So people really didn't have to think that hard. They just saw whatever popped up in the channel. Browse channels, that's what I'm looking for. No. I could be thinking of something entirely different. Invasive reports. So there was a RSS feed from EdMaps. Apparently I need to upgrade that. But it was dropping in whatever reports came in for a given area. So if you're just looking for it's not quite a message board, so I'm not going to go back and find a particular thread. It's just a kind of an open space where they can all come and you're getting instant messages and chatting about what's going on. It's an entirely different experience from what you're going to have in Basecamp. It just depends on what you're looking for.
Yeah, we'll we'll check out both options and see what works for what we need. We're still in the kind of early planning phases for this.
Yeah. Some people like to be able to come back through and browse through threads of conversation. For other folks, there are only 5 threads of conversation we're ever going to have. Let me set a channel for that. And if you want to know what's going on, join the conversation here at some point. Yeah. It's an exciting time. It can also be frustrating. We're here to help if we can. So, anything else we can help you with, Deb?
Nope,
Nope.
I'm good. Thanks for all the time.
Yep. And Metin, I'm looking back through the chat. I see a message from you. I'm
Yeah.
gonna
Metin wants to know the image page views drop off beginning in April. And so his question is in regard to the stats and why that changes. And Kernal and I have chatted and feel like it may have to do with the new image site interface, but wanted you to confirm that.
That is absolutely correct. So one of the things I have on my to-do list, and you can also see just going back in time, this was back when we went from, we changed how this was being done and eliminated bots from the website. When we eliminated bots, yeah, there's a lot of bot traffic. And then this is when we had the method we had now, and then you do see it drop off again because we changed websites, and the new website didn't report that in the same way. So that data is available in our Google Analytics. So when I get the web stats coming in from our other things, I'm going to pull a new version of the views from our Google Analytics, which we have going back much further to when we first made the change. So I can repopulate all that data in and get a better measure of page views. But you are right, they did drop off because the new website didn't do what the old website did. The new website does a whole lot of other really cool things, which is also the reason why we didn't go back to try to fix it, because the data was just somewhere else and we just have to write the routines to pull it back. Progress is a wonderful thing, but every once in a while, something doesn't get brought along for the ride. Any other questions or things we can answer? And Deb, you're making good use of Google Translate because I know your Turkish is not good as well.
No, no, nope. It's a fabulous tool.
It's a shame they don't put it directly into Zoom. That would be really handy.
I'm sure there's a plug-in.
Um,
Oh,
and I think that's all the people who don't work here. That's all we really had planned for today. I think I'm going to go check the other room to see what's going on with that group. they're still at it, oddly enough.
He says thank you.
Yep. And
File image, don't
Yep.
compromise your professional seriousness.
yep. It's always fun trying to get everything together. We've loved having images from your part of the world because it's things we don't see. So it's great that you've been making sure those show up. I imagine there's folks out in Turkey that also probably don't want to see some of the things we have, and we're glad to keep the images going back and forth. So, all right, I'm gonna go hop to the other room to check on them and see how they're doing, but everybody else have a great weekend. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Have a great weekend.
All right, so if we sign off, we're not going to mess anything up, right?
You will not mess anything up. This room will, if you click end meeting for all, it will end meeting for all.
Oh,
If you just leave the room because you're center moderator, then we're fine.
okay.
I'm gonna jump over to the room, see how they're doing, and then if they're all set, we'll probably end up closing this up. So,
Okay, sounds good.
yep.
Let's see. Hey, Jess or Annabelle, anything we need to look at for, nope, she left. Oh, there you are. For screw worm or anything?
I think Annabelle already made the changes that Chuck had put in the chat. I looked and it looked like it had been updated.
Okay.
And I just need to check to see if Jordan's updated the wording in the app, and then I think we're good to go.
All right. Appreciate
So.
it. Cool deal. All right then. Well, we're gonna sign off, Metin. We'll see you again, and thanks for all the hard work today, Jess and Annabelle.
Yep.
Yep. All right. I'll try not to. I'm gonna let y'all sign out, and maybe I won't end the call for everybody. I think I just leave. Yeah. Okay, yeah. I don't want that. Just leave.